Yeah, Beck is sweet.
My name is Nishal Goburdhan. I'm an internet analyst at Packet Clearinghouse, and I'm going to tell you a story because I'm from Africa, and one of the things we love doing is telling stories. About a year, probably a year and a half ago, the building that my mum lives in got fiber, finally. Yes, we have fiber in Africa, we do. So, I'm a good son, right? Say yes, I'm a good son, of course. And what does a good son do when your mother's building finally gets fiber? You do the right thing. You get your mother off the crappy 2 megabit DSL that she's been living on all this time, and you get her onto fiber. So I go out to my mom's place, I spend the day there with the technician. It's the first install he's doing, so that's no problem. I'm a geek. I've got my own light meters, my own visual light fault detectors, everything that you could imagine. And I help get the fiber installed. I spend the day tuning a Wi-Fi, everything's working at 100%. So at about 6 o'clock, I go to my mom and I say, I've got good news for you. We've upgraded your internet access. It is now 50 times faster what it used to be. And I tested this beforehand, so I know that this is true, okay? Because you have to test things with my mom. And my mother goes, really? She gets happy. She doesn't understand this concept. She just knows better is, better. So she's like, let me text. So she pulls out her phone. My mother's toting an iPhone something or the other these days. So she pulls out her phone and she says, I'm going to test. Now pause for a minute here, because as a techie, you probably have a way of thinking how you're going to test if internet service is going to be better. My mom is now 70, never reveal your mom's age. So she pulls out a phone, she opens up her favorite messaging application, and she starts doing that, typing a message to her sister. And if you've ever watched a 70-something type, it's not the agile finger movements of a 16-year-old who's happily doing this and sent off 8 messages by the time you've blinked twice. My mom's hacking away at a phone, one finger at a time, and she tells me, I think they lied to you. This internet is not faster at all. So why am I telling you about my mother? Well, because I'm a good son and I love my mom. But because what I'm going to talk to you about today is also something that's meant, really, for these kinds of internet users, I think. Internet users that don't necessarily appreciate the nuances of what makes the internet, the way you and I know the internet like. So I'm here to talk about Quad9. Quad9 is a DNS recursive server that was launched last year. Quick show of hands, who does not know what DNS is? Because then we can skip the boring stuff, I think. Everyone here, I was going to say, is there any lawyers in the room? And then I realized there actually is one. So I better not call that out. So the DNS, as we all know it, it's the internet's telephone book. It's the way that allows us to be able to say what is example.org and how does it translate to an IP address, something that our computers can use. And DNS is something that has been around with us for a very long time. The internet is 30-odd years old. DNS is almost as old as the internet, and older depending on whom you ask. And it's insecure. The DNS is non-encrypted, and then there are lots of issues with that. So let's start talking about some of the issues initially. The first problem with the DNS, as we know it, is that the DNS was never designed to be secure. So it's non-encrypted pieces of information that's moving backwards and forwards across the internet all the time. And because it's unencrypted, it means that the messages that you're sending backwards and forwards are available for somebody, anybody, whether they be nation state, whether they be your ISP trying to check up on you, whether they be people like Jan, the naughty people on the internet that are trying to track what you're doing. That sort of information's out there, and they're available for gathering, inspection, and perhaps doing something on that. And let's leave the doing something on it for a bit. What's important is that you understand that this is a feature. This is the normal feature of DNS, right? This is what you get, whether you realize it or not. as a function of people being able to sniff or snoop what's going on into this DNS, the person that's trying to gather the information is able to gather a very rich click trail of what you've been doing on the internet. Now this is, the easy thing is, well, you know, there's other ways of getting this. You can read cookie information and you can, you know, look to see what the top sites are from your domain. But one of the things that DNS does, which makes it difficult for other technologies like, you know, looking at your cookies and stuff, is to be able to track things like what vulnerable software is on your machine. Understanding vulnerable software that's potentially on your computer is a very, very, very attractive thing for miscreants, okay? Now you probably have, stepping aside from the miscreants for a bit, we all want our privacy. You've got some measure of privacy in this part of the world using those 4 letters that I'm told not to use that start with G. But the rest of us don't, right? And the rest of us also deserve a shot at being able to have some kind of secure, meaningful, secure private internet communications. And then when you're using DNS systems, you're obviously prone to using the system that's closest to you, a system that's provided to you by your internet service provider. Modern internet service providers, and just about everybody, is using Anycast these days. But one big problem with Anycast instances is that they haven't made it out in as detailed way as we'd like across the internet. And I mean, the 2 days that I've been here in Timisoara, I've listened to people tell me exactly that. They keep talking about the content is not here. And that's exactly this, just seen in a different way. This is content that you're trying to get to, albeit not cat videos. It's the direction to how to get to the cat videos. And if the pointer to get to the cat videos is not working, the one that you have here locally, then the next best one might be, who knows, half a continent away, and that's going to affect the way that your DNS service works. Because it stands to reason that the further away your DNS server is, the further away you are from the machine that you're trying to request, the worse off the performance that you're going to have. And this is unfortunately a factor that we see in. When existing DNS operators choose to deploy DNS services, the recursive services that they make available to the public, they tend to pick the well-populated, well-connected points in the world, which is great. I mean, this is how everybody starts deploying infrastructure. But they very often forget that there's a significant portion of the world that isn't as well connected as some of the more connected regions. We're not all as well connected as London Heathrow or Amsterdam or Frankfurt or whatever it is. The other problem that happens is when your name server has a cache miss, so you're querying something. So my email address at home is nishal@controlfreak.co.za. And you've probably, I think with the exception of Jan, none of you have ever mailed me at home. So if you're trying to email me, your cache servers don't know about that. So they're going to have to do the recursive process of filling that in. And everything that we've spoken about so far, the idea about the recursive name servers being far away, all of that is exacerbated by the fact that you now have to troll down not just the .za tree, for example, but the co.za tree and then, well, controlfreak.co.za tree as well. And those servers may absolutely not be anywhere near you as well. And through all of this, you've got to contend with commercial recursive operators, the guys that are running servers in the middle, who are collecting your information. They're collecting your information, and they're monetizing it in ways that may not necessarily be obvious to you, but that business is out there. There are US organizations that exist solely to report back on who is querying what in the DNS. It's fantastic when you look at their results sometimes. We fix some of this stuff by saying, or we think we fix some of this stuff by saying, oh, well, we'll just introduce DNSSEC into all of this. But what folks forget all the time is that DNSSEC is just proof that what you're querying, you're getting an answer to what you think you should be getting an answer to. So there's no measure of encryption that's involved in here at all. It's just, yeah, the right person responded to you, or yes, you got the right sort of answer back, and that's it. And not everybody signs. I mean, go look it up for yourself. The statistics on DNSSEC are quite dismal these days. Even RPKI and IPv6 are better than that. And that should tell you how poor DNSSEC has been embraced across the internet. And of course, every other potential problem that could occur, you could find somebody along the path that's trying to do something malicious to one of the recursive name servers. So using controlfreak.co.za, if somebody was trying to take out co.za, you'll never get through to me. There's this inherent reliance that the operators of the infrastructure in between are all capable of doing what they're doing. They're all running high available services. They've applied all the best common practice fixes, et cetera, which is not always the truth. And you'll only really find this out when there's some sort of attack against the infrastructure. And because I can see you're all starting to go, oh, is this guy going to stop about the DNS? The last thing I'm going to mention is the information leakage that you get when you query something. So most people don't actually know, but when you send a request for something like example.org, when you're looking up something like example.org because that's what you're really looking up, when you send a request out to the root name servers, you should actually be saying, what's the name servers for .org? What you're actually doing, or what the software underneath is really doing, is saying, well, how do I get to www.example.org? So that's information leakage that could be stopped. And again, you have authoritative name servers that are trying to monetize all of this information. They're collecting this, they're selling it off to an operator that we cannot mention, and well, they're making money out of something that I think that they really shouldn't be doing. So before I start talking about a solution, people always start wondering about who's running this. I think as human beings, we've tend to become distrustful over the past, 2,000 years. And to me, it's helpful to explain the organizations that are involved in this and what the role of each of them is. So Quad9 was an idea between, frankly, it was Global Cyber Alliance, GCA's idea. And they came to us, they came to PCH, and they said, we have this idea about running an open recursive name server on the internet. And the recursive name server needs to fix two problems. It needs to fix the problem of privacy. So people should be able to query the DNS without fear of their information, who they are, what they're trying to query, being logged, sold, and monetized at some level. And they should be able to do this all across the world. And they should be able to do this with some measure of security. We have this idea that while the internet starts to grow, and the internet of stupid things starts to grow, which is probably the bigger problem, how do we get all of these things connected safely onto the internet? Are we able to provide some sort of DNS filtering service, or DNS firewall service, as I like to call it? So GCA came to us with the idea. I work at PCH, as I said. We said, absolutely. We run a global Anycast network. We can help you deploy the network if you'd like. And IBM came on board, saying, hey, we've got this cool prefix, 9.9.9.0/24, and we'll help with some funding to make sure that the project stays stable and it will continue to run for, well, the next couple of years. I mentioned the roles of each because it's clear and it's important to me that you understand that that's where the responsibility of each party lies. GCA came up with the idea and some funding, IBM came up with the prefix and some funding, and PCH is basically running the back-end network. There's no information sharing that goes between these organizations. So this is not a case of IBM Big Blue trying to sniff your DNS traffic, which is what the Twitterverse makes it out to be. This is not a case of Global Cyber Alliance, who was started by ex-UK and ex-NYC cops. This is not a case of law enforcement sniffing in on your DNS. The GCA guys have zero access to what the Quad9 systems are. In fact, Quad9 is its own separate legal entity. It's a completely separate US nonprofit 5013C something. It's incorporated in the United States. And all it exists to do is run DNS, but we'll talk about that in a second. So how does Quad9 protect you? And this is the thing that makes it different, and this is really what I want to be questioned on. The first part of it is that there's zero concept of Quad9 keeping any kind of PII, personal identifiable information at all. The piece of personal identifiable information, the thing that usually identifies you in a DNS request is the source IP address, and Quad9 does not log source IP addresses at all. It doesn't store it in any possible way. And you'll hear some operators of DNS services say, We store your address for an hour or for a day. We use it for some analytics, and then we anonymize it, or then we delete it, and it's, whatever they do with it. Quad9 does none of that. Your source IP is never stored. So as a function of it not storing, I can't actually provide you with some of the cute statistics that people like to see at this point. So this is also my apology for not having any nice statistics to show you, other than, well, the stuff I'll talk about. And that's important to us. Not logging your source IP means that we could never, or Quad9 could never ever be in a case where, for example, its data is ever compromised, because the data that Quad9 keeps would be, was the DNS request, did it trigger a malware attack, a malware event? I'll talk about that in a second. And what's the source network that it came from? And that's the only thing that Quad9 records, whether or not it triggered a malware event and the source network. The second thing that Quad9 does that differentiates it from the other DNS operators is that by default, it offers DNS over TLS. So this is encryption in DNS. DNS over TLS is a well-accepted standard. And this was the first to do it back in November 16th, I think the date was, last year. So if you're interested in security, if you believe that your DNS request should be private, well then, try and find the Quad9 node that's close. Actually, there are lots of Quad9 nodes all over the world, and you can encrypt to it. There's wonderful tutorials by the community, and I'll say that again, by the community that explain how to run this. So this is community members like yourselves that have basically said, well, we care enough to do this. So if anybody is using PF, for example, or PF Sense, there's a great tutorial out there on how to do this, the OpenWRT stuff. The guys have been very careful about how to write it up so that you can run and you can manage encrypted end-to-end DNS. The Quad9 box, the recursive resolver as such, comes with what we call a PCH DNS node. So this is effectively a bunch of equipment, right, that gets deployed at, typically at internet exchange points across the world. And it's usually a combination of a bunch of servers, some switches, some routing gear, or some of which is virtualized, some of which is just base metal. The PCH node comes with a few DNS root operators that deploy infrastructure on that, a few TLD operators, and a whole bunch of SLDs. But the benefit you're getting out of this is that for that much infrastructure that's usually deployed, depending on where you are, you're getting the option of having your DNS root requests answered, a very good chance that your TLD requests are going to be answered, a very good chance that your SLD requests are going to be answered, and a very, very good chance that no bad man-in-the-middle attack is going to happen, because everything is going to be hopefully answered out of this one node. Now, of course, it's naive to think that that's going to answer all DNS requests, right? It's not this is all of your DNS requests in one. But it's a good part of securing a significant component of what should be your DNS requests. It's my job to grow those nodes. It's my job to bring more TLDs and things like that on board. And this is a service we do free for TLD operators. So if you're a TLD operator in there, please find myself or Yana, and we'll happily help you. And the thing that I haven't spoken too much about, well, one of the things that Quad9 does, actually at this point the only thing that it does that differentiates it significantly from the large DNS operators, is that Quad9 offers Quad9 works through a malware feed, an anti-malware feed, I should say. So we get threat information fed to us from about 19 different providers across the world. The IBM X-Force security team is one of them. There's a whole bunch of others. So if you can think of a trusted anti-malware vendor, there's a good chance that they're providing a threat feed. And the threat feed is effectively a list of some kind of malware that's sitting out on the internet. And what Quad9 does is it takes feeds from these 19 operators, it distills them into one big magic feed, and puts that inside the DNS. So that if something on your network, and I'll say that again, something on your network is trying to do a DNS request, it goes through the malware feed first, and if it's non-positive, if it's an okay-ish request, you get fed back your answer and everything just moves along. If it is malware, you get fed back an NX domain, and well, everybody knows NX domain means this doesn't exist, so you get firewalling in DNS against malware. So I'm going to pause for a second to say that carefully again and slowly this time, because I get excited when I speak and I'm worried that you missed this. This filters malware. Nothing but malware. So we might have contentious ideas on what should or should not be filtering. Some people might think gambling should be filtered. Some people might say pornography. Some people might say Formula One cars, right? Quad9 does none of that because the one universal thing that we all agree on is that malware is bad. Malware is out there by criminals, and we want to stop that. So the only thing that Quad9 filters on is malware. And the feeds aren't generated by Quad9 staff or anybody like that. It's, as I said, the 19 TI providers. They present us with the feed. We put that in the DNS. And when I started this about 2 months ago, on average, Quad9 was blocking about 2.2 million requests a day. So not too little, not too much. But the important thing to think of is that every day, 2.2 million times, some criminal is being denied access to a resource. That makes me happy. I'll say it quite openly. I like that. I like that some no-gooder is not being able to fulfill what he thinks he's able to do. And that's an important thing. Quad9 is its own non-profit. So in vast difference to some of the other DNS providers out here who may be running a DNS service as something else that they're doing, all that Quad9 does is DNS and nothing else. And it's never going to do anything else. It's never going to be a web hosting company. It's never going to be a v-hosting company or anything other than that. Its sole purpose in life on the internet is to be able to provide you with secure, encrypted, if you want it, DNS services and filtering if you want it. That's it, nothing else. And the fact that it's a non-profit, at least in US law, and I'm not a United States citizen, so I'm saying this, quite loosely. But at least in the US, because it's a non-profit, its rights are protected. It can't be bought. So there's never going to be a case of a shareholder going, hang on, we want you to monetize this, or we want you to increase the revenue that we're getting out of this resource, and we want you to do A, B, C, D. So its rights and its abilities are protected. So as Quad9, we don't have to worry about turning a profit on this. That's not the goal of this exercise. The goal of the exercise is to be able to provide some kind of safe internet services. And why? Well, I'll go back to how I started this presentation for my mother. Because when my mother gets an email from some Nigerian prince that says she's won something, first my mother might think, my son's been to Nigeria recently, maybe he left something behind, and we're worried about protecting those users, the users that don't know any better, who deserve the same amount of protection that you and I, the more savvy users of the internet, are. And if you think, okay, well, Nishal's mother's probably the exception, think about your smart TV. This is a tech-savvy audience. I'm sure most of you have smart TVs. When's the last time you got a software update for your smart TV? My TV stopped providing updates in 2012. I'm sure most of you are probably within a 1-2 year cycle of buying your television and not being able to do anything else. Well, how do you do that? How do you install an antivirus on your TV? I'd love to know. So if you're able to do it, please let me know. Where Quad9 is, I made a point of saying that it's one of the goals of Quad9 was not to be in only well-connected industrialized areas, and that's obviously where we are. Quad9 has nodes in many of those places all over the world, but we're well covered in, well, we set a goal of about 150, and when I gave this talk last week, I was still saying we had 132 nodes. They've upgraded the map, so now I'm very pleased to tell you, if you can't read it, it says 153. So the goal that we had set, soft goal that we had set, we've managed to exceed. There is a node in Romania, there is a node in pretty much most of the surrounding countries, and if they aren't, I'm hoping to reach out to the exchange point operators, and shortly in the next couple of months, we hope to fix that. So those are the addresses, 9.9.9.9. If you're v6 literate, you should be using 2620 FIFI. If for some reason you decide that you do not want access to the filtering, and you just want secure DNS, then 9.9.9.10 will respect your privacy, but not provide you with, the filtering feed that is out there. But all the questions that you can possibly have and that we won't have time to answer anymore are on quad9.net. So please go check out the website. Thank you very much.
We do have time for questions.
Hello, Ned Krajinovic from SOX. I have one comment and one question for you. First comment, since you have at the entrance all the data like any other resolving DNS server, you can collect all the private information like anyone else. So it's the only question of trust. Do we trust you that you do not do that or not? We know that in the past Tor network stated that they do not collect any logs, but when three-letters agency came to them, suddenly some logs appear and they catch some hackers. So that's the question of trust, not only, that's not the technical question. And my question is, does your system compromise DNS routing process that is used by CDN, since you do not forward this IP address of the end user to the other root DNS servers or DNS server of some domain, like Google DNS server for YouTube? What will happen and how Google's system for YouTube will work if you do not forward the IP address of the user which is using your resolver on Quad9? Thanks.
Okay, so thank you. The issue of trust, you're absolutely right. I'm asking you to trust me. I can tell you that this is what we do. This is what Quad9 does. Sorry, I'm using we and Quad9 interchangeably. The goal is for Quad9 to undergo GDPR certification to prove exactly what you're asking. So independent, what's the word? Auditing.
Verification.
Right. Auditing, an independent auditor and verification. One of the things that we were waiting to do was for GDPR to come out, launch the, and I'm not the expert, so you'd have to ask someone internally, but launch the, this is the process for how you can say that you are actually keeping all of this. And once the auditors who are able to audit and provide the relevant information to say you can now tick that box, that's absolutely on the plan. That's something that we've always wanted to do. For now, I can tell you that we do not store the source IP addresses. We don't even store the queries that you're asking. As I said, all that's kept is the source AS. And the reason we do that is because normally if the baseline network is doing about 1,000 queries a second and suddenly we see it spike to 100,000 queries a second, we want to be in a position where we can reach out to the network and say, do you know you're suddenly sending an uptick in malware requests, for example? Do you have everything under control? Is there a problem? Do you need assistance? Can we put you in touch with people? Because we've got a nice Rolodex. That's the only reason we do it. We don't keep the requests. So we don't have we don't keep your personal information. We can agree to disagree. There's nothing in the request that I could use to tie back against you. Absolutely nothing. I'm not joking about that. The second part was about
DNS routing.
The routing. Yes. How do we ensure? So they don't actually need to. They need to know one of two things, right? There's ECS, which is you can provide the local address of your LAN via DNS, and I think that is as scary as hell thing to provide to DNS operators. In fact, that's one of the queries. That's one of the questions on the FAQ on the website. We don't do that. If you really, really want to, I think there's a 9.9.9.11 service, which is not announced yet, which will potentially do that, but you have to actually manually configure that in your browser, in your DNS service options to do that. The other way to solve the problem is for the network that you're trying to get to, the Google Cache or whomever, to understand the query source address of the DNS server that is making the request, as opposed to the source address of the end user. So you could be in Belgrade, for example, querying the DNS server that sits in here in Timisoara, if it's what you do. All that the cache will see is the query source address of the machine that's coming out of Timisoara. Now what we've done is we've shared the query source addresses so they know where we are geographically in the world. But at no stage is the information about your source IP ever passed to them. All that they'll see is, that this is coming out of Timisoara, it's probably close enough, so you'll get fed out of Timisoara instead of if you were querying Belgrade or something like that.
Yes, but this will practically destroy the global caching system of CDNs because...
No, it won't.
Yes,
so let me give you an example.
Yes, it will destroy because I know that practically every major ISP in Serbia, it has caching node of Google and caching node of Akamai. And if their users will be feeding by caching node from Timisoara, then the local caching node will be useless, and the quality of service provided by caching node from Timisoara to Serbia will be problematic because we do not have direct link connection from Timisoara to Serbia. So the traffic is going around to Bucharest, to Sofia, then come to Serbia, and we will have a problem.
So your first assumption was that all CDNs use the same kind of system. They don't. Google is completely separate to the way that, for example, Cloudflare would do it. Google and Akamai do fudgement of the DNS, whereas Akamai, for example, would do pure anycast, which is I will try to get you to the closest IP. For CDNs that perform in that manner, which is I'm going to try to get to the closest source, anything that we provide is immediately not a problem. I can say this not only because we've tested it, but also because I run 3 exchanges in different points in my country, and we've tested with the CDN operators there.
I'm running IXP. I'm hosting caching nodes, and I know they are not using anycast.
The anycast in the form of Cloudflare will not break, and we've tested it with them. The second type of situation, the situation that a Google or an Akamai use, is actually very easy to solve. And the way we've solved it is pretty much the way that they would do it. Akamai, for example, do one of a few things. They take a feed from you and they'd say, map all of the addresses that are provided from this BGP feed into a node that we know as being in position X on the internet, okay? Or what we've done is we've said, these query source addresses from our network, in other words, so if there was going to be a Quad9 node here, the query source address that we would be using out of Timisoara, we would provide to them. So they would map that QSA to Timisoara in the same way that they would do it out of your network with a BGP feed, except it's being done statically between us and them at this point. So when they see a request coming from us with a query source address from Timisoara, they know that this is coming from the Timisoara node, and then, well, the magic should kick in at the CDN side to say feed it out of Timisoara. It sounds kludgy. It does sound kludgy, but it does actually work.
I think you
And
were
if you
having
want, we can.
during lunch.
Yeah.
Because you're standing between people and their lunch, and it's not a good place to be.
No more questions. I was waiting for. You guys promised questions.
I will be very fast. Zoran Perovic from Serbian Open Exchange. How do you protect from false positive malware detection?
That's a good question. And I should have said this at the start. I apologize if I didn't. No system is 100% foolproof. So there are false positives that sometimes are possible to make it into the system. We've had one case of it happen so far. User reported that there was a false positive, and in about 2 hours it was taken out. So because we're not providing the data, it's very difficult for us to say that this is 100% clean. What we do is we react to the queries that users provide to us to say, hang on, we can't get to it. So right now there's a lookup thing on the website. So if you go to Quad9.net, you can see if something is being blocked. I believe there are plans to be able to do that via an API as well, so that you can see if something is being blocked as well as a service provider. But we do have to rely on feedback from the end users. The best that we can hope to do at this point is to say that we'll react to those quickly and fast enough so that it doesn't ever become a problem. The one case that in the instance that I spoke about, the provider couldn't explain how it got in there, so they just got axed from the TI feed. So they're no longer part of that TI feed. But thank you for the question.
Any more? Nope. No, so it's time for lunch. Okay. Nobody? Really? Yeah.